Good morning, good afternoon. This is Maria Brindelmeyer speaking. I'm the Senior Knowledge Management Specialist at Youth Power Learning at Making Sense International, and welcoming you to this webinar on youth programming, a youth programming assessment tool. And we're delighted to have our colleagues from Youth Power Action that are going to make that presentation. Just some very quick introduction before we get into the topic. So Youth Power Learning is a 5-year USAID-funded project that is now in its 5th year and is focused on positive youth development. Positive youth development aims to equip youth not just with assets like skills and funding, but also with the agency, with the ability to contribute and providing an enabling environment for them so that they can actually achieve their goals and have a really positive youth development environment. So what has Youth Power Learning been doing, and how can we partner together? We have the website youthpower.org, which you may have already used in the past. We also have provided a PYD Positive Youth Development Learning Agenda that looks at what works and then has identified the areas where additional research is needed. And so if you want to contribute to that one, please get in touch with us. We have created measurements for positive youth development, and there's a whole toolkit that is available for that. And we have communities of practice, 4 of them, one on youth in peace and security, one on gender, one on youth engagement, and one on cross-sectoral skills for youth. So we hope that you'll be engaging in some of these activities over time. So with that, let me hand it over to Christine Brady, who is the director of the Youth Power Action Project, and will introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you so much, Maria. As Maria said, my name is Kristen Brady, and while I am Project Director for Youth Power Action, today I'm going to be talking about an activity we've developed under FHI 360 and USAID's Strengthening Civil Society Global and Before we get into the program, I want to just briefly introduce my colleagues who will be joining me today. I'll be joined here in Washington with Alex Leedy, who is a technical officer with our Civil Society and Peace Building Department. And Alex and I and a number of our colleagues at FHI 360 worked on the development and pilot testing of the tool, and we were joined with support from Iman Hadwe Saeed, who is a consultant based in Jordan, and she has been a senior capacity building team lead under USAID's Civic Initiatives support project in Jordan. And she led our work in Jordan, where we pilot tested and held a workshop to fully develop the tool. And then we'll also be joined by Catherine Abrikian, who is based in Jordan. She is a senior monitoring and evaluation specialist with our Local Partners Development Project, and Geraldine Simmons, who's our grant manager, also based in Jamaica. So our agenda today will be to talk a bit about the background, how and why we developed the tool, the process we went through to co-create and pilot in Jordan, and then pilot testing as well in Jamaica, and then really walk through some of the steps we need to do to implement the tool, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. So we identified the need for the youth programming assessment tool because we found that in working with a lot of youth serving organizations in developing countries, we find that the concept of positive youth development is quite new. And sometimes the PYD concepts are also very abstract to people. So we wanted to get very concrete and specific about what does implementing a PYD approach really look like. So youth serving organizations can identify specific standards and benchmarks that really make concrete specific actions to implement a PYD approach. The primary goal of this was really to promote reflection among youth serving organizations so that they can identify their own strengths and weaknesses of the programs, give them an information base upon which they can go into a program improvement plan, and enhance their own knowledge of PYD terms and practices. And we wanted to also help introduce elements of the youth lens elements for organizational and capacity assessment tools as well. As you'll see, we will go through this process of thinking about a self-assessment, identifying needs and priorities, creating action plans, and implementing action plans. So that is the cycle that we expect organizations to go through, so this leads to performance improvement. I want to say one thing, that we did not intend this to be a high-stakes assessment tool, which could be used to qualify for funding, for example. We really wanted to start with this as a capacity building tool because PYD is such a new concept. I think over time it could be used with a much more rigorous base to serve as a tool for measurement in a more for funding or to measure progress over time. This walks through the process. We'll go into much of these steps in much more detail throughout the webinar, but we started by looking at the evidence base, what tools are out there already, and what was the base for which those tools were based on. Alex is going to talk a little about that in more detail. We then created the framework for it and decided what was our conceptual framework for the tool. We developed a basic, we drafted a basic tool. We held consultations with some of the organizations who were implementing similar tools and had a stakeholder meeting to identify what interests were from other stakeholders. And then we drafted the instrument. And then we did a several day process to co-create with youth serving organizations in Jordan, and then pilot test it. And then we're at the final step of dissemination, which we're starting today. And I want to also mention that we will be holding a launch session on July 9th at FHI 360, and we'll be sending out notices to ensure that we can walk through this in person with many of you.
Okay, so just to give a little bit of background about how the tool came about and what the research was that went into it before even creating the draft instrument, is that we looked at a lot of different after-school program assessments. We realized that there were a lot of assessments that were geared towards after-school programming, especially in the US, but there is a gap that it didn't really look at a youth-serving organization as a whole, and it also didn't take into account organizations in developing countries, which had different needs than what we were recognizing in these after-school programming assessments. We did notice that there is one tool that had been used in the West Bank and had been adapted for that context, but not an overarching framework that we could use. So the graphic that you can see on this slide is one that is used in a lot of different after-school assessments. Basically, it breaks down what all those tools have in common and how they're different, and you can see that there's a lot of commonalities and also commonalities with the PYD framework. So all the tools measured relationships, environment, engagement, social norms, skill building, and then the structure. And then a few of them also measured the criteria around the edge of the dynamic. And so after we did all of this research, we decided that we wanted to validate it with organizations that are actually working in international contexts. And so we did a survey to try to figure out what the needs were that others recognized as important for youth-serving organizations. And through the survey, a lot of it was open-ended questions, so we just kind of coded it by PYD term to see if the PYD framework would actually work for this, or if there were things that fell outside the PYD framework, and also just to see what to emphasize. So you can see that contribution was a huge component that people recognize as being needed and also as a struggle. What we found when creating the tool is that contribution is actually very cross-cutting. And so you'll notice in the tool itself that the contribution section only has a few standards, but it's because it's really integrated throughout the tool as well. So what we focus those standards on are exactly what people noted were the most necessary pieces that were contribution specific. So leadership, youth engagement, being youth driven. Enabling environment was also a significant piece, and that's also a significant piece of our tool. And then in terms of organizational capacity, many people cited this as the top struggle, which really emphasized that need to add not just the PYD framework, but have an additional component that addressed the organizational capacity piece.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we did decide, having looked at the other tools that were out there, we decided to base oh, sorry, thank you. So the feedback that we got from our stakeholder outreach was USAID needing that we needed to make sure that we have strong focus on inclusion throughout the tool. That they also provided guidance from their own work on implementing similar tools for civil society building programs, that we should focus on learning as opposed to accreditation. Our colleagues in Jordan identified the main challenge of people's time to carry this out. And we also needed to make sure that people understand that the scores that they get are not tied to funding. And so that this needs to be a very honest reflection process, that the stakes are not high, but this is really for your own benefit. In our conversations with the YPAT Center, they have about 15 years of experience of implementing this around the United States, and they really designed this to be a self-assessment as well as being implemented by an external facilitator. And in many cases, their process is one of a beginning stage of a pretty extensive support program for performance improvement. They have evolved their tools and have come out with specific tools for specific age groups and specific uses, and they've just come out with one that has much greater focus on social and emotional learning and building those soft and life skills. And then we also heard from IREX in the West Bank and Gaza, which was the only international tool that we identified, and they found that they had a hard time providing youth an opportunity to provide feedback throughout the process. So the structure that we used was one of basing it on the youth power domains and features. There were a couple of other different frameworks out there, but they basically all ended up overlapping well with the PYD framework. And because youth power learning has done such a good job in building out awareness of the PYD concept, and this was what USAID has really used as our framework for youth programming, we stuck with that framework. And so you'll see it's broken out into a number of different sections, assets and agency, where we get more specific on skill building, and particularly around facilitator and different staff practices for youth skill building, around youth contribution, where we look specifically at opportunities for leadership, youth involvement in program design, implementation, and decision making, and youth participation in the community. And then the enabling environment is really building out the other features of PYD. And then the last section is that youth lens on the organizational capacity issues. We're going to move to Iman in Jordan.
So, yeah, thank you, Alex. So I'm going to talk about how we did this together with FHI 360 staff from DC. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Not well.
Not well. All right. How about now?
No.
Not
yeah.
yet?
Is that the loudest you can do, Iman?
Yes, I guess it is. Okay, I will try to raise my voice. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, so what we did in Jordan was we first of all we tried together with FHI 360 DC staff to come up with the standards for each section, and then we held a workshop which we had like 20 people participating in, Through that workshop, we actually had, asked people to look at the sections and the standards that we listed there as a draft. People, I think, were very interested in providing feedback from their different backgrounds and experiences, which I think was very enriching for the development of the tool. And then we also had another meeting with one of the organizations as well, like an interview or more focus with that organization to get their feedback. Based on that co-creation workshop, we drafted or we modified the tool. And then we actually went out and piloted it with 3 organizations. And from the first pilots, I could say that all organizations were very excited. I think this was the first time for them to see such a tool and reflect on themselves as youth serving organizations. What we found out is that organizations did not know much about YPD. So, I'm sorry, PYD. So that needed a little bit of reflection from the beginning to explain what positive youth development is as a framework, and then go through the assessment itself. The 3 organizations were very interested in the tool and very interested to see the results. They all asked for like a report to see how they could use that in the future to build an action plan. The 3 pilots also helped us look at the process. And one of the things that that came up was, when do we engage youth through the process? For one of the organizations, we found that the engagement of youth in the assessment, like the assessment of the program at the beginning of the assessment was helpful. For others, they thought that there is no need, that the youth assessment can be just like everybody can sit together from the youth as well as the organization, and this can be an open conversation and an open assessment. We also looked at whether we assess the youth perspective, the organization from a project based view, or the organization from a programmatic view. And both were okay. However, it was easier to look at it from the project perspective. So whenever they had a major project that they were implementing, the organization found it easier to kind of relate to the different standards that were in the tool. And finally, the length was an issue, because the tool, of course, takes a lot of time. I think the recommendation was to kind of adjust based on the size of the organization. But basically, it does take time. And the issue of having it over 1 day or 2 days came up through the 3 pilots. Overall, I believe that this co-creation process was very successful. It helped ensure that the tool came from the organizations themselves, who have a lot of experience from working with youth. Alex?
Thanks. So after the Jordan co-creation and piloting, then we also piloted in Jamaica. So I'm going to turn over to Catherine and Geraldine to discuss that process.
Hi, good morning. My name is Geraldine. So for Jamaica, we chose 6 organizations which were located in both rural and urban areas. The organizations had a mix of capacity levels, and they targeted different age ranges. Some served only children, and some served just youth, probably like ages 12 to 29. All right, for one of the organizations in particular, we noted that the tool was not appropriate for them because they worked with other organizations who served youth rather than, they worked with other organizations. Their activities were youth focused, but they worked with organizations who were serving youth and who prioritize youth issues. For another organization that we worked with, the youth that used the tool, they thought that they were consulted. They thought that they were not consulted in terms of program offerings and in terms of policy formation. For the organization itself, however, when they did the assessment, they felt that they included the youth in their program choices and in policy formation. So that was kind of an interesting mix.
Yes. So other differences that resulted in sort of different experiences for the tool for piloting were that capacity differences really made a difference, so lower capacity organizations, our lowest capacity organization, did not understand, for example, that the focus group should not have staff there or should not have, a lot of people who were not necessarily affiliated with the program present. And there was no separate space for us to get youth feedback without parents or other adults present. Also, a lower capacity organization also struggled with some of the more abstract or unfamiliar concepts that required a little bit more facilitation work on the part of the facilitators. But in contrast, the higher capacity organization found the tool did not actually reveal as much about their organizational practices. They were already doing a lot of the things that the tool was sort of investigating, had through their exposure to other sources, already a lot of awareness about some of the concepts, and so they found it significantly less helpful, whereas a lower capacity one felt that they learned a lot. But the lower capacity organization might not have been in a position to implement that learning without lots of support. Another way that we disaggregated sort of the organizations and tried to create sort of different environments for tool testing was that we included one organization that served youth with disabilities. Those disabilities included mobility issues as well as vision issues, hearing issues, and intellectual disabilities. So we had to arrange for an interpreter for the deaf student, which took a little time, as well as for the mobility issues, we had to adapt the then methodology for getting youth feedback on the fly to allow students to sit down and still participate in the process. Also, for the students with intellectual disabilities, we had to break down concepts very clearly and incorporate some additional paraphrasing techniques to ensure that everybody understood. So one of the adaptations that came out of the tool is that the way that the youth feedback portion is conducted, there are now multiple options given for conducting that, which includes change for mobility issues. Also, we also tried to tighten the tool in terms of time further, and there were some other small changes made. But turning back over to Alex.
Alex?
Yeah, thanks. So based on these two pilots, we created a tool set almost. So there's the main YPAT self-assessment form. So this is the main rubric, and it has all of the details, and we'll go into that more in detail. But we realized that it wasn't really enough on its own. So we created a few side documents. So there's an implementation guide that's for the actual implementing partner. So that way they can get the information they need before actually doing the rubric. It gives some background, some of the research that's involved in the YPAT, why this is an important tool to do, just to provide some context. There's also a facilitator guide, which is specific for the facilitator to help them take into different considerations like social norms that they might need to be cognizant of during the assessment process, even how to select who is part of the assessment committee and who is part of the youth groups that we'll discuss in a minute, just a little more detail. Then there's the youth feedback form, which correlates with the self-assessment form, which we'll show you again in a few minutes how exactly that works. But it's a form to really try to collect youth perspectives on the different standards that are included in the entire rubric. And then the final step is the scoring grid and action plan outline, which is very similar to what's used in like typical organizational capacity assessments, if you've seen those.
Okay, so now back to Kristen. We're going to go to looking at the tool itself and the process for actually implementing YPAT. So when the organization gathers together to go through the YPAT self-assessment form, if you could go one slide previous. Thank you. The organization should create a self-assessment committee, which will be made up of about 5 to 8 members, and included in this committee should be a mix of senior leadership, management staff, and program staff being the most important, and at least two participants from the youth reflection group. So the numbers, in some cases, you may need to expand the size of that group. And ideally, you need to have a facilitator who's going to facilitate the entire process. Ideally, the facilitator is external, so it can be objective and ensure that the participants are all providing objective responses. But if not, we give some guidance as to the type of facilitator you should identify and the process that facilitator needs to go through. So now we're going to go into the form itself. So this slide here, if you're looking at, you should be on the one that says domain contribution. And if you looking for, we'll take number 2A2 as an example, where the standard here is that youth are provided opportunities for leadership. And you'll see that there are 4 different levels for the benchmarks that you could be scored at. So the beginning level is not yet developed, and in most cases, that's basically that they're not doing anything to meet the standard. So in this case, the program does not provide any opportunities for youth to identify, initiate, or lead activities. You're moving up, you'd be at the beginning stage or level 2. In this case, the program provides youth the opportunity to lead a specific part of a specific activity. And in each case, you'll see in this form that we provide examples in the row below so that organizations can have some ideas of what that would really mean. Then if you move up to the next level, the developing level, level 3, you'll see in this example, the program provides opportunities for youth to lead a full activity within the program setting. And then at the final level, the competent level, the benchmark is that the program provides opportunities for you to initiate, design, implement, and lead activities in and outside of the program, as well as providing growing levels of responsibility and autonomy in the program. And these are pretty, this breakdown between the different levels is pretty consistent throughout the tool, where we'll have basically nothing, and we might have each level will provide slightly stronger levels of more examples of how you fully implement that standard. And you'll see at the top right-hand corner of this slide, we've provided links to different tools that could help organizations learn more about that domain. So you'll see those links up on the right-hand side. Just another example here, this is under the belonging and membership feature of enabling environment. And so this standard would be that the program proactively seeks to recruit a diverse group of youth to be represented in the organization and its activities. And we found that even though most organizations understand the benefits of inclusion, one of our experiences in pilot testing is that most of them didn't really do an intentional process of doing outreach. And so a lot of the different benchmarks get to that level of intentionality, and what are they doing on a programmatic or regular systematic basis to make sure that their program is being is reaching out to a diverse group of young people. And then the other issue that came out when we were talking about this is people immediately went to gender, but they often had a harder time thinking about other types of diversity issues. So issues around LGBTQ, ethnic, religious minorities, disabled. And so that was the other area that we incorporated into this standard and these features was, do they have both the breadth of diversity and the intentionality?
Yeah, and on that, it's part of why we created the examples to help make it clear what exactly each level looks like. Because we realized that the top level is like a bit generalized, like a little, some, more. It's a little bit hard to quantify it. So the examples, when they're going through it, help them actually see what the next level could look like. So the final section of this tool is for the organizational capacity piece. And so we designed this based on organizational capacity assessments that we looked at a bunch of different ones like the OCA, the OCAT, and just tried to figure out how we could align this section so that way it could either, depending on how the organization decides to use it, it could either be integrated into the organizational capacity assessment or it could just be used as part of the YPAT on its own. So this is what it looks like in the actual YPAT. You'll see that there's the same setup as the previous section. So there's score, there's section for evidence, and then there's what the different levels will be. So not yet developed, beginning, developing, and competent. So this is based on the OCA. So this is what the standard looks like when it's actually on the OCA. It's just a normal board composition. So what you can do is you can just add on basically our section as extra bullets inside of the larger section. So each of the organizational capacity assessment standards, they fit under different pieces of an OCA or other type of capacity assessments to try to make it easier to use both if you're like worried about timing or you don't want to do the full programmatic side of it. So in addition to the assessment tool, one of the big challenges that we had that both Iman and Catherine mentioned were about the youth engagement, how to engage the youth, what ways we can make it interesting, and so they want to participate, but that it's not just a complete repeat of the assessment tool itself. So our general framework is that we have these youth feedback forms that they complete in reflection groups that are done without program staff there. So that way youth will feel comfortable participating. They then choose 2 or 3 of them to go and become representatives in the self-assessment committee. So when they go and become representatives, what they have to do is share the opinions, not just their own opinions about the rubric, but what the general consensus was about the standard on a whole. And then they should also take part in deciding what actions need to happen and seeing if they could have a role in actually implementing subsequent actions. So this is what the youth feedback form looks like. Basically, the standard is on the left side. So this left side is what would be in the actual assessment form. And then the second column is how youth might see it. So this example is youth of all, or let's use the one that Kristen was using earlier, 2A2. So youth are provided opportunities for leadership. So the youth section of that is, do you have opportunities to choose activities you want to lead? And then you ask for examples. So examples of what types of activities. And then that can link back to the YPAT. The benefit of this form is that it really empowers the youth to actually share their opinions, because while in Jordan, the youth seemed comfortable and they were comfortable with the staff and they were okay just joining self-assessment committees, other places we've been to, there isn't that same level of comfort. And so they need this extra step in order to, 1, gather more evidence that they feel comfortable sharing, and 2, just be ready to actually participate fully in the YPAT process. And there's a bunch of different, in the facilitator's guides, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do these reflection groups.
be it you can put down different posters and have people rate them and then come together for a discussion. You can just go through the tool normally. You can play different games, just trying to gauge based on the age group. And then this is what the scoring rubric looks like. It's actually an Excel sheet, so it'll calculate your scores for you. You just need to put in, the facilitator would put in the scores, the evidence cited, and then recommended actions. So this happens for each of the standards as a way of recording exactly what different people's perceptions are and start to gauge what people might prioritize during the action plans. And then this is the action plan. So this format is very similar to what the OCA one is as well. So you can choose actions that you think could be addressed, and we recommend that you look back at the examples that are provided in the assessment form itself, and you can see different ways that you can take on to get to the next level. So that's, again, another benefit of the examples piece of the YPAT. You identify who is responsible, resources and technical assistance you might need, priority level, timeline date, and then you actually try to monitor the status of it. And this tool, part of what we realized in both pilots is that it really is best when it's part of the program cycle because there's more accountability and also more resources. So part of the issue that Iman was mentioning in Jordan is that we had minimal ability to provide technical assistance after. So once they got to the action plan stage, the organizations were a little bit like, this was great, this is wonderful, but what next? And so putting this as part of your actual programming is helpful, so you can provide the assistance needed. So Kristen's going to talk about a few different ways that you can actually implement the YPAT.
So one of the things that we indicate in the implementation guide is that organizations should take a look and think about maybe there might be, you might only want to take on one domain or one feature of it at a time or at any point in time. One might be more relevant for your program than others. So you could go through and adapt it or shorten it for specific purposes. If you were doing a workforce program, for example, you might want to focus more on the skill building and assets portion of it. If you're doing a civic engagement, you might want to focus more on the contribution and the youth leadership pieces of it. And you can obviously add and add additional questions. I think you could do a lot more in the contribution section and add more in the civic engagement piece. We really struggled a lot with making sure this was not too long. We probably had, at one point in time, 7 or 8 additional standards in the tool, and we just kept saying, we've got to tailor this back so it's not too much. People don't hesitate before doing it because of the length. The document itself is a robust document, the tool itself, but it's manageable, particularly if you pick 1 or 2 domains that you want to focus on. So a few ways that we've been using it so far. We just implemented it in Zambia under our SCS Leader Associate Award in Zambia. And Alex might be able to talk a little bit later more about that experience. We're also using it in the DRC, where we've already identified organizations to work with, and we're going to help them use to measure as part of our capacity building program in the DRC with the integrated youth development activity. I think all of us, if we reflected on our different programs that we implement with youth, could identify an important role, ways that we could implement a tool like this. I was recently visiting our Career Centers project in Morocco, and it was really a great example for me of how that PYD lens is so important. And even though we didn't design that project with the PYD lens, it had all those same elements, and we could use a number of the different pieces of YPAT in that project, just as we could for preventing violence in a CBE or PBE program. So it is those basic foundational features of PYD really are common across different sectoral programs. So, we would welcome other thoughts and ideas about how this could benefit your program. Thoughts on how, is there a need for additional adaptation? I mentioned earlier that we will be holding an event on July 9th. We invite you to come. We will have it in the morning, July 9th at FHI 360. We'll have about an hour and a half. We can spend a lot more time going into some of the details. We'll have the tool on hand if people want to take a look at it. And I encourage you to look at it in advance. It has been posted to, do you want to provide the website?
Yeah, it's on ngoconnect.org.
And we will post
And
it
We'll
also.
post it on youthpower.org as well.
Youthpower.org,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
we'll add it with the follow-up from the webinar.
Yeah, perfect. I think we've tried to provide an overview with you here this morning, but I think the most helpful thing is to take a look, walk through it yourself, and ideally before you come on July 9th, if you've walked through it yourself, you'll have a much better idea of what it looks like and have more specific questions. But let's go ahead and open it up. Do we have any other questions? Maria, do you have any questions?
So one of my questions, how long does it take to implement YPAT?
Yeah, so it depends on how much time you have. So we found that in general, it can be done in 3 hours. If breaks are helpful is one thing that we definitely learned. It's a lot to get through. So, and then the youth reflection group usually takes around an hour and a half or 2 hours. So the whole thing takes 5 hours. So you can do it in a full day. You could break it up in different days. Recently, when I was doing it in Zambia, we were doing the capacity assessment, organizational capacity assessment, and the YPAT. And so I kind of spread the OCA piece of the YPAT throughout the organizational capacity assessment piece, and then we just did the PYD, and it took a few days to do the whole process.
We encourage organizations to share the full tool with all the participants who are going to be in the self-assessment committee, that they read it first, that they do their own scoring by themselves before they come to a meeting when they share it together. So that does help everyone. It is an additional time, but you come much more prepared for that session. You can make that 3-hour session much more useful as well.
Yeah, and the examples really are helpful. So I find that if you don't read it ahead of time, then you're not quite sure. A lot of times when we're going through the YPAT, organizations are really passionate about what they're doing. Like, everyone wants to be doing the best that they can. And so it takes a minute, like they're like, oh, definitely a 4, definitely a 4. And we're like, well, look at the examples for a 4. Are you sure that those examples match what you're actually doing? And then they'll look at the examples and be like, okay, maybe it's like a 2 or 3, but that's good to know that we can do this extra steps.
I think the other factor depends on how many different programs you have. We found a number of organizations we pilot tested with in Jamaica had 2 or 3 different programs within the organization. So with that situation, ideally you would do it for each program, because each program is going to be different. So that could obviously expand the time as well.
So we have several questions online. Usha says it would be helpful if you can share examples of time and costing for implementing this. My experience that organizations are quite unfamiliar with how to engage youth and what it takes. Do you want to?
Well, we just talked about the time.
Yeah.
So obviously the costs are related to the time. The only other cost related to is if you have any specific costs to bring youth together for the youth reflection groups. You'll want to print the full YPAT form, and you might, for the reflection group, use we provide a number of different examples of how you could go about doing the youth reflection groups. You might put the standards across the room, and you have sticky notes, and you let people go put sticky notes and post it. There's a number of different ways you can do it. So you just need to think about some of those really practical logistics about having the right supplies available, and think about what's the best way for your specific youth to engage them in that process based on their age and skill level.
Yeah, and in terms of costing, even for printing and things in Zambia, the printers were broken, and so we found other ways. Like, you can kind of make it work. The ideal, of course, is to have it in front of you so you can write down notes, but some people were typing or had notes on the side, and you can kind of work around that because realize that printing is quite a time-consuming process sometimes.
The other cost could be if you get an external facilitator, and that will obviously depend on the amount of time and the cost of the facilitator, but we do recommend it because I do think it helps, one, deal with the issue of time constraints, and somebody can really spend the time to get to know the tool and can be more objective and help create more objectivity in the scoring process when the group is together.
And actually, kind of in relation to something you just mentioned, is I was wondering how the information is shared with the youth, especially the plan, the action plan.
Yeah, so ideally the youth representatives at least are part of the action plan. In Zambia, the youth were so excited from the reflection groups that they all decided to stay for the assessment of the whole process. So they were very involved. It's one of the benefits, and see, one of the questions had to do with engaging youth, like being inexperienced or unfamiliar with it. That's definitely true in a lot of the places that we were piloting, where there was sometimes a different perception of what was happening versus how youth felt it happening, and so that was one of the benefits of engaging the youth. And the youth reflection groups make it a less intimidating process, I think. So it helped open up the door for this conversation because it wasn't just one youth being like, my experience is. They're kind of speaking on behalf of the greater population.
I mean, one of the interesting things, if you're working with an organization that doesn't do very good at youth engagement, your reflection group might reflect that lack of engagement to begin with, where the youth will be quieter, they'll have a harder time answering some of the questions because they haven't been supported in a way that provides that voice that they feel that they have the right and the ability to speak up and provide an opinion.
Or that's the only program they've been part of, so in their mind it is the ideal program, like they love what they're doing and they're not aware of what the next steps could be in improving the program.
We had a lot of situations where people were just so happy that they were scoring high. We had to push them to go back and say, well, does it really look like this?
So we have a few other questions here. One is, and that may be a little bit early, but Katie is asking, what are the most common action items that organizations identify as a result of conducting the assessment? And perhaps, I don't know, from the pilots, you can already identify some.
They've been really different because it's been different capacities and different types of organizations. So it's been everything from like maybe developing youth clubs to create better youth engagement to, there's a lot about like how to connect. Well, actually, Jamaica did this great, but like how to connect with other organizations and that more integration of systems. In Zambia, one of the big things was that the youth realized, and the staff also, that parents weren't told anything about the program, including for launch events. And so like that's like an easy thing for them to just start letting people know what's happening. But really, it just ranges because some care more about the skill building component. Some want to figure out how to connect with the community more. There's a large range.
One of the things I found in sitting through the pilot testing was that a lot of organizations had room for growth on the contribution piece. They kind of thought they did, and then they kind of went back and they said, yeah, actually, we really have a lot more to go. Even some of the strongest organizations, they recognized that was an area.
Iman or Catherine or Geraldine, do you guys have any additional thoughts about, I know the action plans are in different phases of actually creating them, but of things that organizations were saying they'd like to prioritize?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I hope my voice is not too low also this time. I just wanted to add that
Scream.
It is. I will try. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to say that organizations found that they are applying a lot of things in one project, but not taking it across the organization. So one of the outputs was like as an action plan, to standardize these things like in the organization and not just have them per project just because a donor asked for it.
Yeah, that's a great point, and one I think we actually saw across a bunch of organizations where some programs were implementing different PYD features that they could then just carry across to their other programs also.
Yeah, so in terms of Jamaica, organizations just really wanted, I think one of the big things was life skills in terms of curriculum, having the skill be repeated more often, so that they could get it more frequently, as it's not something that many organizations were doing before. But I think organizations, again, depending on where they were in terms of their youth programming or where they were in terms of specific pieces of their youth programming, really focused on different aspects of the tool.
Yeah.
We also have one question here about who to reach out to if they're piloting or using it themselves, and I guess would that be you, Kristen, and Alex as a first contact, and you can all see the email addresses here.
I also want to just mention, I neglected to mention this earlier on, that Youth Power Learning has been quite helpful throughout this whole process. We were very fortunate to have the support of Christy Olenek from Making Sense and Youth Power Learning to provide her feedback as we did our initial design of the tool itself, and Youth Power Learning will be supporting our launch and will be helping us as we promote the launch and the tool moving forward. So thank you to Youth Power Learning and to Christy.
Great. I think one of the questions here from Lynn is potentially adapting it to people with disabilities. I don't know if you've had any experience with that yet or any thoughts about that.
So for Zambia, sorry, this is the example high on my mind since I just got back from doing it there, is that the accessibility piece is actually the strongest thing that came out of what we needed to improve, because we had one person with disabilities who was in a wheelchair, and it's just Zambian environment is not really set up well for people with accessibility issues. And so the youth were really good at pointing out examples of things that we can do to our program to make it more accessible, like how to make the lunch more accessible, how to even transportation issues. So in terms of Lynn's question, I think that you could definitely add adaptations. There's also a lot of pieces. We tried to include that accessibility piece throughout, and there's multiple questions that are related to that. And you can make that integration with services piece even stronger if there are specific places that you would recommend that organizations reach out to. We have a standard that's about being able to recognize issues and connecting them with the relevant service agencies. That might be where disabled people's organizations might come into play.
And I think one of the comments here from Usha is that organizations need to plan for time of engaging youth in the projects because the capacities are limited and the budgets are limited. Right. So I think you've already addressed some of those.
Yeah, the implementation guide does provide a number of different ways to do the youth reflection groups, and I think each organization will need to think about what's going to work best for the youth engagement piece, but we do, it is a step in the process, and it is an essential part of that process.
Yeah, you can maybe tack it on at the end of an event where you have a lot of different youth coming to, so that way you don't have to pay extra for transport or different. There doesn't have to be like a strict timeline, like you can work it around when people are already gathered if that's a constraint. But the rest of it is cheap, like it's just printing if you're able to. So that would be really the major cost.
And have you ever tried to use it virtually? Or?
We haven't. We haven't had to have that. I think that I was just thinking about that question. I was like, well, you do a survey, but it's really the conversation that's important. So maybe virtual would work, but it's definitely somewhere where people can talk about the different issues and examples.
one of the other things that I want to mention is that when we did it in the pilots in Jamaica, we walked through the background on PYD before we implemented it to make sure they kind of understood the background behind this. So we thought about the benefit of having a video or something that really takes you through step by step. That is why we put within the tool there's a little help box at the beginning of each section, which points you to resources that will give you more background in those sections. Because we do want this to be an opportunity for organizations to better understand what PYD is and what specific steps and actions you need to take to implement PYD.
And one of the questions is also kind of to build on Lynn's question about disability. Yep. What about other marginalized populations, ethnic minorities, or sexual and gender minorities?
Yeah.
Any thoughts about adaptations or things to particularly look out for or avoid?
I mean, I think this is going to require the implementing organization to think through how to adapt it. I mean, it may be that they want to do the youth reflection groups, separate groups for boys and for girls. It may be that you need to be very specific about which youth you invite to these reflection groups so that you are inviting some of those potentially more marginalized youth to participate in it, not just the strongest youth who are already leaders in the organization. I think the question around LGBTQ, I think each of the organizations that we talked to, they had to stop and think about how would they raise some of those issues, particularly where it's not openly discussed. So every organization is going to have to reflect and adapt and put their own cultural lens on it. And it would be really great when organizations first look at it and decide any adaptations they need to do, that they involve youth in that process. They reach out to youth to help them think through how should we walk through some of those specifically sensitive issues.
And we're coming to almost a close, but one last question in terms of local languages.
Yeah.
So it will be translated into French. But that's the only translation that we have at this point. But we do want people to take it and own it. So.
And I guess one question I want to add at the end is if people are using the tool and have had feedback, should they also reach out to you, Krista, and Alex?
That would be wonderful. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
All right.
And we also want to hear what comes out of them. So even if positive, negative, whatever, we'd love to hear how it's being used.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we will then share that as we do further outreach.
Well, with that, then thank you very much for having had just some really interesting presentation. I think this tool is going to be so helpful. We know that it's sometimes challenging for organizations to think through all the aspects of youth engagement and really implementing PYD kind of compliant programs. So I think it's really good to have this tool to help people think through it. So thank you for having developed it, and thank you also, Krista and Alex and team, for having presented it. So just kind of in closing, what you can do next, obviously you can go and look at the tool, provide any feedback, and hopefully also visit the Learning Hub for youthpower.org, where we will also post the tool, we will post the slides and the recording, so you can also share it with other team members. And then obviously also if you have any materials that you want to share on youthpower.org, just send them to us and we will be happy to post them. So thank you very much, and we hope you will be able to join us on one of our future webinars.